Hello and welcome to Veritatis Vox, a new channel devoted to being a voice for the voice of truth, who is Jesus Christ our Lord. All glory and honor be to him. My name is Matt Gaspers, and I'm joined today by Kennedy Hall for this inaugural live stream on my new channel. Very excited to discuss his latest book, What Happened to Catholicism. I have my copy right here, which we'll be referring to throughout today's show, and it officially releases tomorrow from Sophia Institute Press. So if you haven't already, check the link in the, or later, you can check the link in the description to this video and check out his book, buy a copy, buy several copies, hand them out at church or wherever. Kennedy, I hope you're having a blessed Holy Week thus far, my friend.
Thank you. Yes, I can't believe Easter's already almost here. It's crazy.
It is crazy indeed. All right, we've got a few people in the live chat. I know this channel, as I said, is brand new and I'm getting some subscribers, so hopefully we'll have a few people in the live chat with us today, watching with us and participating. So I asked Kennedy, of course, to discuss his book, and I thought it being Holy Week with the release of his book, the title for today's show is Modernism and the Passion of the Church, which might be a phrase that you've heard before, Passion of the Church. Benedict XVI actually used it publicly during his pontificate in the context of being asked about the third secret of Fatima and the sexual abuse crisis. He was going to visit Fatima in May of 2010 and was talking about the vision of the third secret that was published in the year 2000 under his tenure as the prefect for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. And he said, beyond this great vision, referring to what was published in 2000, of the suffering of the Pope, which can in the first place refer to Pope John Paul II, said Benedict, an indication is given of realities involving the future of the Church, which are gradually taking shape and becoming evident. So it is true that in addition to the moment indicated in the vision, there is seen the need for a passion of the church. And remember, the vision was shown, this vision and the text that are the words of Our Lady that have yet to be revealed were originally given to the children in 1917, which is right around the time that this modernist problem was festering in the church. So he talks about it, the need for a passion of the church, Benedict says, which is naturally reflected in the person of the Pope. And he says later on in that same answer, the sufferings of the church come precisely from within the church, from the sin existing within the church. So
Mm.
I think it's important for people to understand, however, that, and you mentioned this at the beginning of your book, even if there hadn't been a sexual abuse crisis, and in the book you talk about Freemasonry and the wearing, all of their weird rituals and things, even without any of that, there would still be a crisis in the church today because of modernism. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, and you bring up this passion of the church, and this is important, and we should give a couple caveats as well, just because I'm always foreseeing the objections that people give, and from both sides of the same coin, which is the Sedevacantist side and the Novus Ordo Popesplainer side, because they're kind of like two versions of a similar thing. Sorry, guys, but you are. And they'll say things like, well, when you think passion of the church, you're saying the church is not indefectible and so forth. Well, it's a scriptural motif, and it's been there since day one. I mean, it's, at the Passion of Christ on Good Friday, there was one bishop there, and they'll say, oh, he wasn't officially a bishop yet. He didn't start his ministry yet. Well, yeah, they didn't start the ministry yet, necessarily speaking, but obviously the apostles were the bishops. This is why they're called the successors of the apostles. And the fact that the Pope wasn't there when Christ was being crucified, well, he wasn't technically starting his office yet, whatever, till after fine. But the point is that Peter wasn't there, and John was there, and the Virgin Mary was there, and Mary Magdalene representing the faithful were there, and they were weeping. And this shows us that when there is a passion, the vast majority of the hierarchy is going to flee, and there will be the odd prelate who is Orthodox who will remain, and there will be the faithful who are with this prelate, even though the hierarchy has fled. And we saw this, for example, with Athanasius, and we see this at various times. And I believe we saw this with Archbishop Lefebvre, to some degree at least. And we see many passions happening all the time. You see, men like Bishop Strickland getting, cast into the exterior darkness as the church goes through a dark hour, and the men of the church who should be comforting her don't, and they do things like put videos out saying that Ramadan is like Lent and all this kind of stuff and whatever. And I'm kind of rambling, but the point is we are going through a passion, and whether it's the final passion, who knows? But these things are typological, and they're in the scriptures, and we go through them at times.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I say in the book, one of the reason why I kind of wrote it was, listen, this is not to take anything away from the work of all the great men, the Venaris, the Taylor Marshalls, the Michael Davies, and so forth. Well, I guess Michael Davies wouldn't really fall into this category because he didn't really do much about the sort of conspiracy side of things. His was mainly doctrinal, historical. But sometimes as Catholics, we have like this insistence, especially traditionalists, we're like, okay, we got to find out who the enemy is. And we're like, oh man, look at the bankers, look at the Masonry, look at the Zionists. And it's like, yeah, these guys are all enemies of the church, for sure. But what's at the root of the enmity? And it's the heresy behind it. If it's the elder brethren, so to speak, that are the enemies of the church, well, it's not the biology of the person that's the enemy of the church. It's not the last name that's the enemy of the church. It's not the location where they live that's the enemy of the church. It's not even the fact that many of them might work in finance. It's the fact that it's the Antichrist religion that's the enemy of the church. If it's the Masons and the lodges, it's not the fact that he has a funny apron or he has stupid rituals. It's the fact that liberalism or Masonry is liberalism. Liberalism is the enemy of the church. And, we could keep going. It's not the fact that the man happens to be a Jesuit in our modern day. It's that the Jesuits sadly have adopted modernism as their theological training. Modernism is the enemy of the church. And that's what we have to understand, that heresy is a sin. And if the prelates of the church can sin, they can be heretics.
Mm-hmm.
So we have prelates and we have theologians who are heretics, and they have been for 150 years, largely in many places.
Mm-hmm.
And that sin is modernism.
Very well said. Very well said. Speaking of modernism, let's get into the definition of that, which you define on page 2 of your book. I'm just going to read it for everybody, and then we can discuss it in more detail. So I love the title of chapter 1, An Enemy Has Done This, an allusion to scripture, St. Matthew chapter 13, our Lord's, that parable about the enemy sowing the weeds among the wheat. So you say in your book, modernism can be defined as a heresy that, seeking to reconcile the Catholic faith with key tenets of modern philosophy, notably agnosticism, subjectivism, and progressivism or evolutionism, reduces the faith to subjective religious experience and reduces dogmatic truths to mere symbols or metaphors that must continually evolve in order to remain alive. So there's a lot there to unpack. Maybe we can talk a little bit about these errors of modern philosophy. I also love you talk about later in, I think, the next chapter, the 4 horsemen of the philosophical apocalypse. That's a great image, great imagery there. And those are Rene Descartes, David Hume, Immanuel Kant, and George Hegel. So yeah, what can we explain to people about the essence of modernism with like agnosticism, vital immanence, all this stuff?
Sure. And I want to say thank you to Father William McGilvery, who helped me make that definition. Modernism is really complicated. It's not like liberalism, for example, is awful, but it's much easier to define. It's basically a rejection of the authority structure. I mean, that's basically what liberalism is in all its forms. Satan was a liberal. I won't serve. I won't be subservient. I won't be subject to your authority. In any event, so modernism. So the reason why I go with that definition, but then go immediately to the philosophers, is because at the heart of modernism, is bad philosophy.
Yes.
And philosophy is the handmaid of theology. You know, if you don't, and you know what, historically, and I say this in the book, philosophy and theology were not separate schools. When you look in the time of Aquinas and so forth, it would be things like you would say philosophy and Christian philosophy.
Hmm.
Philosophy is theology, ultimately.
Right. The philosophy is basically dealing with natural truth that we can know by reason. So it's natural theology. That's part of philosophy. And then theology is dealing with supernatural truth, that which has been revealed by God, which we wouldn't know without him revealing it. But the
Exactly.
one doesn't cancel out the other, just like grace builds upon nature, theology builds upon philosophy.
That's right. And also, you can't find a thinker from antiquity who wouldn't base even the natural truths on the supernatural subsistence of things, you know. So this modern separation between philosophy and theology is in fact arbitrary, and it's indicative of the change that took place. And you mentioned Rene Descartes, for example. I mean, Rene Descartes, famous for his famous quote, "I think, therefore I am." Oh, everyone's so deep. It's so deep. It's actually insane. I think, therefore I am. So wait. Because you're thinking, you exist. Now, does this mean that well, first of all, why would anyone ever have to figure out whether they existed or not?
Right.
That's just really stupid. You know, like, let's just call a spade a spade. You know, there's different stories about Descartes. Did he lock him? Some people say he locked himself in like his stove.
Jeez.
You know, like some box. Maybe it wasn't. Some people say it was like a cellar. Whatever it was, he was like, I need to understand whether or not I exist. I can't, but I don't know if I exist or not. So I'm going to lock myself into some confined space. That's what the stories are. Well, why? Why would you have to do that? Like, what's wrong with you? And this gives us a revolution in what we might call epistemology. You know, this theory of knowing. And what you're doing there is you're basically you're trying to systematize skepticism about knowing things at all. And you know, in our day, it's we might think it's kind of ridiculous or stupid, but we have these theories about, like, are we in a simulation? Are we in the Matrix? You know,
Right, exactly.
That's Descartes. Like, you know, they might be something that stoners talk about on the Joe Rogan podcast. That's Descartes. Like, stoners talking about living in a simulation are Cartesians. They're just ridiculous Cartesians. Uploading your consciousness to the cloud is Descartes. Now, at the time, people say Descartes died a faithful Catholic. I hope he did. Like, I'm not saying that he himself professed like heresies. I have no evidence of that, and I don't try to make that claim in the book. I'm just saying his revolution in thought was, I'm going to pull the rug out of underneath of everything we believe about belief itself.
Right.
Everything we know about to know itself. And we're going to start from scratch. And the problem is, to do that, necessarily what you do is you now begin with an anthropocentric way of knowing things, a human-centric. So what is real begins in here. Not what is real is out there, and I conform myself to it. That's antiquity. That's the medieval period. That's every sane person before Descartes in all of time.
It's just reality. Yeah.
That's reality. And that's what all of the perennial philosophy of the church. And, you know, the church doesn't obviously say that you must adopt a particular type of philosophy. The furthest the church would go is the very high heraldry of scholastic thought with Aquinas, for sure, 100%. And anyone who rejects Aquinas is on a bad road. And Pius X says that. Nonetheless, what the church does command of you is a philosophy that's reconcilable with common sense.
Right.
Because you can't do theology without common sense. So that's just Descartes. And then when you look at men like Hume, you know who's the biggest David Hume philosopher we have today? Well, a combination of Hume and Hegel and Kant. It's Jordan Peterson. When Jordan Peterson says things like the substrate, those are Humean whatever you want to say, Humean terms.
Mm-hmm.
When he talks about the substrate of existence and bubbling up from there as these forces that fight together until we have this galvanized truth that comes forth, that's Hegel.
Mm-hmm.
When he talks about the utility of religion, where he goes, well, what do you mean by true? When he always says that, what do you mean by true? It's truer than true. That's Kant. And that's modern conservatism,
Mm-hmm.
So these men are at the basis of everything. And the thing is, in our day, in a world of insane insanity, it's like when Nietzsche went beyond good and evil. It's like now we're beyond being beyond insane. I don't know how to put it. in our metaphysics, we don't have metaphysics anymore. This is why, you have conversations with people about politics and religion that aren't trying to live in a state of grace. It's a waste of time. I'm not saying you shouldn't try. What I'm saying is you come to the point where you often get to the point in conversation where you go, I'm talking to a drunk person, I can't reason with the guy who's had 12 gins. He just has to go home until he sobers up. That's where people are at metaphysically. This is why political conversations, virology during a pandemic, so-called, these conversations mean nothing. This is why, in fairness, these men like the Fauci types of the world and stuff, I believe they're evil, but they're also just moderns. They are just moderns, and they don't have any metaphysics, and they don't know how to live in a world where things are not in contradiction, because there's no principle of non-contradiction. And that's why this is where modernism comes from. It comes from the modern philosophical milieu, which is characterized in these ways.
Exactly. And part of that milieu, as I'm pretty sure you mentioned, I know you mentioned it in your book, I just want to look up the quote in Pascendi. Modernists are characterized, as Pius X says, by a passion for novelty, like a lust for novelty. Everything needs to be new, and that's what we've seen in the church over the last several decades. But before we get to that, I just wanted to cover real quickly. So, in addition to this four horsemen of the philosophical apocalypse, maybe take the analogy further. There are the two witnesses mentioned who will witness to Christ and help convert the Jewish people before the second coming, as it's mentioned in the book of Revelation. And just to give a quick shout out, our friend Dr. Taylor Marshall has a great book on that subject called Antichrist and Apocalypse,
which I narrated.
Oh yeah,
you did. I know it well.
Yeah. Yes, it's an excellent read. So we could also say there are like two apostates or two anti-witnesses in the form of Alfred Loisy and George Tyrrell, both Judas priests, apostates, and the latter, George Tyrrell, was a Jesuit. So at the root of all of this, the two fathers of modernism, one of them is a Jesuit, and it's not a coincidence then that the Jesuit order has been so decimated by this heresy, because he was at the beginning of it.
Well, it makes sense that the Jesuits would fall into this as a group. Not all of them. There are still some good ones. I feel really bad. I always say this. I feel really bad for men like Father McTagg.
Yes, agreed.
He's just the best. And whatever. It's too. I mean, he's the last of the Mohicans, and I'm happy. I'm happy that he's holding strong.
Yes.
But because modernism is something that begins in academia,
Yeah.
It's like that expression Andrew Breitbart had, politics is downstream from culture. I don't even know if that's true, but modernism is downstream from academia, we could say. Because it really, again, okay. Catholicism is like a religion for farmers. And I don't mean that as a pejorative. I mean that as like a compliment. Right. It's a religion for normal people.
Think about the parables in the Gospels. They're all for regular, ordinary people.
Exactly. And one of the translations, it says God is a husbandman, but that means God's a farmer. In one of the parables, in one of the expressions, meaning God is in reality. What's real. As a priest in England, Father O'Reilly, and I've mentioned him before, and he gave this wonderful sermon when I was in London last year, and he's Irish, but he was in England, and he's got this Tipperary Irish accent, and he said, the job of a priest is to bring you in touch with reality. And he went on to talk about how the sacraments bring you to reality, and the most real thing is God. And this is a basic metaphysical thing that is natural to us in the sense of we understand it naturally. Obviously, with original sin and the wounds and that sort of thing, we obviously need help, and we need graces, and we need catechism and so forth. But it's normal to us, to our nature, for us to. And I have this friend of our family. She's a convert. She's older now, but she's like English, and she was a convert. She was like an Anglican, not really anything, and picked up this catechism at this, she called it like a penny bazaar, like a thrift shop in a church basement. And it was this old Catholic catechism from long before the council. And she opens it up, and it's like, God made us. And she's like, oh, yeah, this is true. It was the basic truths are normal to us. And it's because they're true. It's just like the basic foods we digest. Like, I'm thirsty, I should probably drink water. I need energy, I should probably have an apple. And I'm really, really hungry. Maybe I should have some roast beef. It's like we understand the different things that satiate the different appetites we have.
Right.
And so the only people that have the luxury of thinking about thinking and knowing about knowing are those who don't have anything real to do.
Right.
And that's academics. And that's why it begins in academia. And the Jesuits are the best historically, and the corruption of the best is the worst.
Which I've always found strange. I've never really studied in depth the history of the Jesuits, but they didn't actually, as I understand, they didn't start out as academics. They were more like missionaries, like Saint Ignatius of Loyola, Saint Francis Xavier, but somehow they kind of morphed into the area of academics. I don't know if you've ever studied that.
Well, yeah, they're missionaries, but what they did as missionaries was teach and set up schools.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's like these are the ones who these are the ones that set up the educational institutions.
Right. And I don't think we're saying that there's anything wrong with academia per se or being an academic, but it does have its dangers, just like any vocation in life or any line of work. And the danger can be to get obsessed about these ridiculous things that actually don't matter.
Well, and look at the greatest theologians we have in the church, with the Dominicans historically. They live a mendicant lifestyle historically. So meaning they have to have this real poverty.
Right.
Because there is this, and that's why we have the Dominican rite. Is the reason we have the Dominican rite, and I talk about this a bit in the book actually. The reason we have the Dominican rite is because they were moved around so often, and before the Mass was centralized, and it was the Roman use. Not to get too nerdy about liturgical stuff, but there were different uses of the Roman rite, and before the use of the Pope of the actual diocese of Rome was made the standard in the Roman rite, there were regional differences, and the Dominicans were getting moved around so often that it was kind of like, we have to learn these new missals so often. Can we just sort of have one? So they have their Dominican rite, which was basically the rite wherever I think it was from Paris or something. But it was one of the traditional rites of the Roman rite. But anyway, or traditional uses. But they got moved around so much because they couldn't be attached to things. So, one of the great Dominican priests alive today is Father Albert Callio, who you know of, at least,
Yes.
if not know in person.
Yep.
And I was on a pilgrimage with him last year, and he's one of the old school Dominicans still around. And he's like, I don't own anything. He doesn't even own his, this is a proper thing to religious orders as such. But he doesn't own anything, and he's, told to go here and go there, and he goes here and he goes there, always studying, always teaching, but he doesn't have the luxury. He doesn't have the luxury of acquiring worldly honors for his study.
Right.
And that's a help to make sure that you don't fall into these traps of this academic celebrity.
Right. Exactly. Well, there's certainly too many priests, or certain priests today who are definitely fall into that category for sure. So something I wanted to mention, I should have done it probably earlier, but so your book, just to explain, and I was very honored when Kennedy asked me last, I think summer or fall, I forget which, to write the foreword. So thank you, Kennedy, for that honor. The foreword, my foreword is in the book. It's kind of a roast of Joe Biden at the beginning. I think
Yeah.
you'll find it amusing and entertaining. So you get a copy and check it out. But I mean, the book is basically like a master class. It's like a deep dive into Pascendi, and that's really the framework of the book. Is Saint Pius X's landmark encyclical Pascendi Dominici Gregis on the error of the modernists. And you know, each chapter of the book kind of deals with a different facet of Pascendi.
Mhm.
So if you've never, even for those who have read the document before, maybe multiple times, Kennedy does a great job of putting it into understandable language, because it is a very technical document written against very technical errors,
Yes.
which
Well,
is one reason why we needed a book like this, I think.
well, that's it. And you know what? I bet if you went to like a big traditional Catholic parish, like an FSSP parish or something like that, an SSPX chapel, let's take St. Mary's, Kansas, and you have like everyone in town who goes to mass, and there's like 5,000 trads. I bet you'll find less than 50 people who've read Pascendi, not
Mm,
including the priests who go through the traditional seminaries. And I don't even know if they're required to read it in all the traditional seminaries, if I'm being honest. They might be. I'm just saying I don't know.
right.
Almost nobody reads it. The only people who read Pascendi are nerds like ourselves, like those present, people who have like a necessity. But I talk to so many like traditional Catholic authors, and they're like, "Well, yeah, I've definitely read a lot of quotes from it." And I'm like, "Have you read Pascendi from start to finish?" Almost nobody has, and you know why? Because it's a slog. It's so hard to read. It's
Mhm.
so many big words. It's there was so much density to the modernist teaching that he was using all these terms. It's like reading Humani Generis, you
Mhm.
know, Humani Generis by Pius XII. I know, like, this is a little bit of a side note, but all the like who's who in Catholic conservative Catholicism will use Humani Generis. Say, look, you can have evolution as a Catholic,
Right.
and it's like, okay, what you did is a Control F search of paragraph 36, and you forgot the first 35 paragraphs where he said, you can't believe in things like existentialism, and it's like they don't even know what that means, and then you look up what that means, and it's something that denies that the essences of things, and it's like, well, then you can't have evolution. Like, you know what I mean? Just like
Mhm.
things like that. There's so much of that in there where you just know no one understands it. So I looked at it and I said, this explains everything, especially paragraph 38, I think. It's the one on reform. I think it's paragraph 38.
Yeah.
It's like a prophecy. I call it prophecy in the book. It's Pius X's prophecy. It's like he said, Vatican II will happen. And it's everything that modernist reform would do. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking to myself, okay, there's no way that I'm the only one who's read this. There's no way. At the same time, it seems to me that so many of the hierarchs either read it as a how-to manual or they probably never read the thing. And I think for so many of them, they never read the thing.
Mhm.
Like men like Bishop Cordileone, for example. He's a really good man. I mean, really good man. He was good during lockdown. I mean,
Mhm.
like he was like, okay, I'll do whatever I can do, like, and I get it. And there's a balancing act as a prelate,
The
I know
sensus catholicus is active in him,
it's
clearly.
active there. It's active there, and he's a good man. And I bet you he hasn't read it. I'm not saying this is a criticism. It's just he would never have been required to. And it's like you
Right.
go through seminary, you got to read your Delubach, and you got to read blah 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 all these things, and you got to read 450,000 pages of Ratzinger and your Balthazar and all these things that don't make sense anyway. And you got to read them, got to read them, got to read them. And you graduate and you're ordained, and now you got to parish. And it's like, I know what I'm going to do with my spare time. I'm going to sit down for 7 hours with an encyclopedia and a dictionary and read a 100-year-old encyclical. It's like that's not going to happen. So I bet you so many of the men have never read it, to be honest.
Right. Right. And now they don't, they should certainly still read the original text, but as a guide, now they have your book, which we're very grateful for.
Yeah.
Um, so to kind of summarize a lot of what you go over in greater detail in your book, I wanted to share with folks and kind of pay a little homage to John Venari, God rest his soul. Here's a picture of John with Father Gruner, with whom he worked closely for many years, and both have gone to their eternal reward. So may they both rest in peace. But John wrote an article for Catholic Family News many years ago. I think it was 97. And Tan Books published it as a little booklet. Unfortunately, it's out of print now. They really should get it back in circulation, called The Permanent Instruction of the Alta Vendita, a Masonic blueprint for the subversion of the Catholic Church. And then the Fatima Center, I think in 2017, the year that John passed away, they reprinted it. So I have both copies here. And he gives a really helpful introduction. This was my first introduction to all of these errors of liberalism and modernism several years ago. And with his great wit, so this section is called "The Enlightenment, My Friend, is Blowing in the Wind." I think that's an allusion to like a Bob Dylan song or something. John was also a very talented musician. So he says, throughout the 19th century, society had become increasingly permeated with the liberal principles of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, to the great detriment of the Catholic faith and the Catholic state. And you go into this in your book as well. The supposedly kinder and gentler notions of religious pluralism, religious indifferentism, a democracy which believes all authority comes from the people, false notions of liberty, separation of church and state, something else you emphasize in your book as being one of the root problems here. Interfaith gatherings and other novelties were gripping the minds of post-Enlightenment Europe, infecting statesmen and churchmen alike. The popes of the 19th century and early 20th century waged war against these dangerous trends in full battle dress, with clear-sighted presence of mind rooted in an uncompromised certitude of faith. These popes, basically beginning with like Gregory the 16th, I think John says, with Mirari Vos back in the early, like 1832. I guess it goes a little further back, but that's really another landmark document there, that encyclical. They knew that evil principles, no matter how honorable they may appear, cannot bear good fruit. Just like you were saying earlier, it's the principles that are the problem. And these were evil principles at their worst, since they were rooted not only in heresy, but also in apostasy. And interestingly, in his first encyclical, kind of as a little sidebar, St. Pius X became Pope in 1903, and he wrote in E Supremi, his first encyclical, he actually speculated that the Antichrist may even be on Earth at that point in history. You can imagine, we can only imagine what he would think about our day and age today. But he talked about the root problem is apostasy from God.
Yeah.
And I wanted to read a quote from the New Catechism of the Catholic Church, which I do have some concerns with because of it's adopted the language of certain ambiguous texts and phrases from Vatican II. But I do like this paragraph 675, which is in the section talking about our Lord's second coming. And this paragraph is under the heading, "The Church's Ultimate Trial." Before Christ's second coming, the church must pass through a final trial, a passion, you would say, that will shake the faith of many believers. The persecution that accompanies her pilgrimage on earth will unveil the, quote, mystery of iniquity, that's from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, in the form of a religious deception, offering men an apparent solution to their problems at the price of apostasy from the truth. The supreme religious deception is that of the Antichrist, a pseudo-messianism by which man glorifies himself in the place of God and of his Messiah come in the flesh. But what I really want to focus on is this phrase, a religious deception offering men an apparent solution to their problems at the price of apostasy from the truth. That's essentially what modernism is doing. It's trying to reconcile the Catholic faith with the modern world. And that's what we saw at the Second Vatican Council. And that's
It's in
kind
the
of at the root of the
documents.
problem. Yeah.
It's in the documents of Vatican II, you know? And this is something, and actually, you know what, Matt, I'll send you in the chat here quickly. I actually just narrated a Supremi.
Oh, nice.
I've been releasing, just as an aside, I just want to put a couple things out there, just some housekeeping. I have been praying about for a while, and I'm going to need people's help to do this. I don't know what that's going to mean, but this is something I've been praying about. I want to narrate and record all of the best public domain old Catholic stuff that I can find and like can curate and whatever. So I've been building a repertoire of old encyclicals.
Oh, that's sweet. I'm going to put this in the live chat so people can watch the can listen to this. Go ahead.
Thank you. So it's actually like this person in the chat says, Popes Against Modern Errors, Papal Documents.
Yes, that's an excellent book.
Yeah, and there's more than that. There's like 50 encyclicals we should all be reading and stuff. And there are old biographies and stuff. And it's something I have on the back burner, but just if people can keep that in mind, because if I do end up committing to that, it's going to be something I'll have to basically appeal to people for support, if I'm being honest, to do it all. It'll be free for everybody, but it takes many, many hours. It's about 3 hours of work time for every hour you listen to when you're listening to an audiobook or something of that quality. And I don't want to release them with stutters, and it's like an audiobook, so it takes time. Anyway.
It's a performance. It's just like a musical performance or anything else. And one little error and you got to start over a section or whatever. So.
It is. And I would like to release them eventually as its own channel, like its own podcast thing, because I understand there are many Catholics who would never listen to them if they knew they were from me, some trad. But if there's just some good old-fashioned homeschooling moms out there who don't even go to the Latin Mass and just want to listen to some stuff or play some stuff for their kids, if they just see, Catholic encyclicals or Catholic audio or something, they might just click on it. And that's not to be subversive. I just want to.
We do have a shout out. Someone saying the narrations so far have been excellent. So
thank you.
Kudos from David Wilson.
But in any event, in A Supremi from Pius X, he makes it very clear that and again, this is something I want to hammer home for people. You get to this point in the book, and because you get to this point in Pascendi, and you compare it to what we're going through today, and you go, listen, okay, either Pius X was right, and every pope subsequent to him, like basically either the pre-conciliar popes in a general sense about what ailed society and the church and theology and history and so forth, they were either correct or everything since Vatican II is correct, because the two of them don't match.
Right.
They just don't. The hermeneutic of continuity that Benedict tried to do with like the funny horse thing.
Yes. I thought about getting that image for today. I should have.
They're not the same religion. And I don't mean there is a new church in the sense of like some whatever, but I mean metaphorically, we have two churches, we have two religions. We just do. Right. Everyone with eyes to see can see this. You have, the conciliar church, which was a term coined not by Archbishop Lefebvre, not by the conservatives, but by the brass.
I think it was Archbishop Benelli, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. And it was under Paul VI. And you have the Catholic Church. And that's just what we have. And it's a war right now within the church herself. Right. How do I understand that? A lot of it's metaphorical. I understand that there's only one church, but it's just something that we experience, and we all experience it. Mm-hmm. So when you read Pius X, you go, my goodness gracious, he is saying all these things are going to take place, and it's all modernism, and modernism is the worst heresy possible. And it looks like
the synthesis of all heresies, as he says in paragraph 39 of Pascendi.
Exactly. And it looks like the Novus Ordo, and it looks like the new theology, and it looks like everything from all the post-conciliar popes, as hard as that is for people to hear. I talk about Ratzinger, I talk about JP2 in the book, and for a lot of people that's hard to hear. And it's like, I bring receipts, It's not just Pope Francis, it's not just Paul VI. It wasn't like Paul VI made a huge gaffe, and then it's all great under JP2 and Ratzinger, and then, oh no, where'd Pope Francis come from? There's a continuity there. There is a continuity. It's just not with the past. Mm-hmm. And it's a striking conclusion that you need to accept, not because it's my idea, but because it's like Pius X predicted everything. Mm-hmm. He predicted everything that would happen, and it all has taken place. So it's either he was correct or everyone after.
And one example that you give, I'm very glad you brought it up. Actually, when I was reading the book, I noted it on the page, and then just a couple pages later, you brought it up. So great minds think alike, I guess. But you talk about, so this is on page 78, and this is in the section regarding the evolution of dogma, which is one of the most insidious aspects of modernism, that dogma can evolve from one meaning to another, which Francis, as we've seen during his pontificate, that's one of the root problems with him, is he does not understand correctly the development of doctrine. He misuses and abuses Saint Vincent of Lerins on a regular basis, who wrote a 5th century church father who wrote about the authentic development of doctrine in the true sense, which Vatican I then quoted that it must be always in the same sense and in the same meaning as the church has always held. It's just like there can be, to talk about biological stuff, there can be variation within species. There is no such thing as one species evolving into another different thing, right? That's a myth. That's a myth.
You just say that because you're a fundamentalist.
Yeah, exactly. So on page 78, Kennedy, you say, in the church, it is in vogue to talk of, quote, living tradition, as opposed to the historical notion of hard and fast sacred tradition. And I've written about this in prior articles myself, even the example that you give. In fact, in the letter that Pope John Paul II wrote, wherein he alleged that Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre had excommunicated himself and committed a schismatic act for the 1988 consecrations, the Polish Pope employed the same term, which is a quote from Vatican II. He wrote, and this is in Ecclesia Dei, the root of this schismatic act, so-called, can be discerned in an incomplete and contradictory notion of tradition. Incomplete because it does not take sufficiently into account the living character of tradition. And then you get into more of the details of that, but he talks about also in Ecclesia Dei, John Paul II says, the Second Vatican Council clearly taught tradition comes from the apostles and progresses in the church with the help of the Holy Spirit. But you get into a potential problem with that word progressive. Maybe you can tell us a little about that.
Well, sure. And do you want to read the whole quote? Because that'll
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, because that'll better.
So yeah, JP2 goes on in Ecclesia Dei, there is a growth in insight into the realities and words that are being passed on. Obviously, that part is true. This comes about in various ways. It comes through the contemplation and study of believers who ponder these things in their hearts. It comes from the intimate sense of spiritual realities which they experience. And it comes from the preaching of those who have received, along with their right of succession in the episcopate, the sure charism of truth. End quote.
So this is the definition from the document De Verbum in Vatican II on the Holy Scriptures. And let's break this down because this is really important for people to understand. So remember, John Paul II says the root of Archbishop Lefebvre's so-called schism is that he doesn't understand sacred tradition. I'm going to stop there for a second and say, maybe people might say Archbishop Lefebvre was I don't agree with this, but he's rebellious or whatever. You want to throw your accusations at Lefebvre. There are many other ones that, in a sense, you could maybe find a way to give it a little teeth. I don't agree with them. I'm just saying if you wanted to, I would not recommend saying he didn't understand tradition. That's the one thing I think all of us should be able to believe that Archbishop Lefebvre. That's like saying Archbishop Lefebvre didn't understand liberalism. It's like, I think he understood those things. I mean, even his worst enemies would not say the man didn't understand Catholic doctrine. His worst enemies would say he was prideful or something and wanted it for himself, but they wouldn't say he didn't understand Catholicism. So to say that Archbishop Lefebvre did not understand or had an incomplete understanding, which means not understanding, by the way, saying you didn't complete the test is a way of saying you didn't do the test. So an incomplete understanding of tradition is absurd. Let's just put that aside for a sec. Because then he says tradition is as follows. But let's pause there for a sec. You have all heard, we have all heard, no new dogmas were defined at Vatican II. So hold on a second. A schism is based on an incomplete understanding of a doctrine that's defined at Vatican II. So if you don't understand this doctrine from Vatican II, you might not be a Catholic. Because that's what schism means.
Right. Which means that something obviously changed at Vatican II if you have to accept something new in order to remain Catholic.
Exactly. And it means not only that something must have changed, it means that something must have been defined. And that thing isn't the same as the stuff that came before. So that means there's a new doctrine from Vatican II. However, the popes who oversaw the council told us what? Pastoral. Now, That doesn't mean there aren't dogmatic statements in Vatican II. There are many dogmatic statements. Of course there are. It also doesn't mean that Vatican II itself doesn't have dogmatic value. It has the value of authentic teaching, which is a technical term.
Right.
Which means, according to John Paul II himself, and Ratzinger, because, they're like Batman and Robin from the post-conciliar, like CDF head, whatever.
Right.
Donum Veritatis, if there is something in the authentic magisterium, meaning what has not been presented as infallible or defined, with good reason, you can not assent to this for reasons X, Y, and Z. So this is the thing that's so crazy about the post-conciliar era. Just this, and we'll get to the definition in a sec, but I wanted to bring this little historical background to show you just how muddled the whole thing is as a paradigm. Because by the teaching of JP2, according to John Paul II, you can disagree with John Paul II when something is not defined. But according to John Paul II, if you disagree with something that's not defined, you're also a schismatic. Big problem. And why is this? Well, the answer to why this is in the definition itself. And I'll reiterate a couple points from that. It says, tradition comes to us from the apostles and progresses in the church. Half true. Tradition comes to us from Jesus Christ and is stewarded by the apostles. They're the guardians of the faith. It's a deposit that they received. If you think of the word deposit, they're the bankers who have the thing that was deposited by the owner of it, who is Jesus Christ. So even from the beginning, it's like, it's not heretical to say it comes from the apostles. It would be better to say something like, it comes through the apostles. That's a slight difference, but it's a difference it's a distinction not without a difference. Mm-hmm. Okay. Progresses in the church. Progresses, toward what end? It's not defined. With the help of the Holy Spirit. Okay, this sentence, although ambiguous, we could accept it. Although we might say, I don't like it, but I can technically accept it as not being heresy per se. There is a growth in insight into the realities and words that are being passed on. Okay, not worth saying, but you said it. This comes about in various ways. This is where the rubber meets the road. It comes through the contemplation and study of believers who ponder these things in their hearts. Meaning, the insight and progress, meaning change of what we believe, comes from how we think about things inside. That's modernism. Mm-hmm. It comes from the intimate sense of spiritual realities which they experience. And it comes from the preaching of those who have received, along with their right of succession in the episcopate, the sure charism of truth. So what has happened here is the paragraph has started with, tradition comes from the apostles. 90% true, but should say through the apostles, from Christ.
Right.
Then it goes right to lay people. And what they believe and then it goes right to what they experience, and then it goes to what's preached. What is the insinuation here? The faith is something that's in this collective body of believers, and then once this is distilled through the experiences that are shared amongst the believers themselves, then that thing is preached. This is why, according to John Paul II, you're a schismatic if you don't get with the program. Why? Because the mass of people experiencing things a certain way is tradition. And if you don't want to be a part of that, you're not part of the church. This is why there can never be full communion in the new church. I was laughing when, and I mean that for anybody. There's no full communion. It doesn't exist. Because, I make the joke. It's like, I think in order to have full communion, you might have to have a picture of Pope Francis beside your bed that you kiss before you go to sleep and you hug while you're sleeping. Because you can't demonstrate in an objective way that you have full communion. You can only demonstrate it in a subjective way. Even the idea that you can celebrate the Easter Mass or the Holy Thursday Chrism Mass, that's still subjective. It's like, so I'm showing up to a thing. I mean, that's a demonstration of communion, but it's a demonstration that I have it, but it's not demonstrative of what is defined. Mm-hmm. So this is why I was laughing, when Pope Francis put out one of those letters to the fraternity, and he said, we can continue to build our ecclesial communion. And I'm like, even the fraternity can't get enough communion, because this is what the definition of tradition is according to De Verbum. It's an impossible task to have enough tradition and enough communion because it's based on experience.
Right. And this is something that's actually already dealt with quite well in the modernism in general, all the way back in 1870 at Vatican I, the fourth chapter of Dei Filius, the dogmatic constitution on the Catholic faith, says the following: "For the doctrine of faith that God has revealed has not been proposed like a philosophical system to be perfected by human ingenuity. Rather, it has been committed, the Latin is tradita, to the spouse of Christ as a divine trust or depositum to be faithfully kept and infallibly declared. Hence also that meaning of the sacred dogmas is perpetually to be retained which our Holy Mother Church has once declared, and there must never be a deviation from the meaning on the specious ground and title of a more profound understanding."
Yeah.
And let me just give you one example from Pope Francis in the last few years regarding the death penalty. And here's where he's abused the teaching of Saint Vincent of Lerins. So as we all know, he revised the new catechism. I think it's paragraph 2267. You might even bring this up in the book. I can't remember if you do or not. I think you might. But anyway, a couple of years ago, he, during one of his infamous in-flight press conferences, talked about, he was asked one question about contraception and then also one about, in another interview, about the death penalty, and invoking St. Vincent of Lerins in both cases, the development of doctrine. So here's what he had to say on July 29th, 2022. I think this is when he was flying back to Rome from Canada after the whole smudging ceremony scandal. I'm sure Kennedy talked about that when it happened. We all remember that, like the shaman invoking the Western grandmother, I think it was, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
So he said, think about, let me see here. So on that occasion, he mentioned two other examples of supposed developments in doctrine, while at the same time deriding those who obey St. Paul's command to hold fast to tradition. Quote, "But many things are called into question. Think, for example, about atomic weapons. Today, I officially declared that the use and possession of atomic weapons is immoral." Now, that one we could probably say has more leeway there. But next he says,
Yeah.
"Think about the death penalty. First, the death penalty, yes. Now I can say that we are close to immorality there because the moral conscience is not well developed." Or I think what he means is it's in the process of developing. And then later, I think the following year in August, he gave an interview to a group of Jesuits, and he said, "Let us get to specifics. Today it is a sin to possess atomic bombs. The death penalty is a sin." Excuse me? God says in Genesis chapter 9, he's the one who imposed the death penalty for the crime of murder. So how could it be perfectly licit for all of salvation history, and then in 2020, August of 2023, you're saying now it's a sin? And he even says you cannot employ it, but it was not so before. Well, what's going on here? Either it was wrong always or it wasn't. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, and it's again the fact that Pope Francis uses the atomic bomb and the death penalty in the same analogy or comparison is indicative of what Pius X said would happen with modernists. Because he says on the one page they utter something Catholic, and then in the next page they utter something of a rationalist, like a modern skeptic.
Yep.
The atomic bomb is not reconcilable with Catholic theology for a lot of reasons. It's just proportionality, the innocence that will die. There's many reasons why it just can't equate to it. It can't be justified. You know, it's funny. You know who was trying to justify the atomic bomb for the longest time was Weigel and what's his name who started Catholic Answers?
I can't think of the name, but
Keating.
oh yeah.
And they've come a long way. I mean, Catholic Answers, don't get me started on the whole stuff recently, but they've come a long way They used to be real anti-traditional, and then they got more. Christopher Check is more like he tends a fraternity or something, much more amenable to the whole thing. But yeah, it used to be amongst the conservative Catholic milieu, the who's who, to try to defend to try to defend the atomic bomb. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But the death penalty is completely different, and it just shows there's just no metaphysics in what Pope Francis says, because the death penalty is not about. The death penalty is a matter of strict justice. It's a one-to-one thing.
Mm-hmm.
You can't equate it with the atomic bomb because there's no justice in the atomic bomb.
Right.
For 1,000 different reasons. And then also, you're just basically saying that God says something in the scriptures, and then it changes. Okay, are they inerrant? Well, they don't really believe Noah was real anyway. They don't really believe in a flood anyway, and all these kinds of things. And it's just indicative of the whole system.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we're getting close to the hour mark, and I don't want to keep you too long, but I do want to cover a couple more points from your book before we wrap up. So basically, as you explain throughout your book, St. Pius X was successful really in diffusing many of the church's internal enemies through Pascendi, through the oath against modernism and other measures. But unfortunately, he was not able to bring all the wayward souls back to the harbor of truth. Like, I think he ended up, it was him who excommunicated Loisy and Tyrell, if I recall correctly. And then likewise, basically his successors, he died in 1914. Then we had Benedict XV, Pius XI, Pius XII. They were successful in keeping those what's called suspect of heresy contained more or less. But I mean, unfortunately, there did prove to be enough obstinate and cunning dissenters to keep modernism alive and well underground. And what you explain in your book is really that Vatican II was kind of a coming out party, so to speak, for the modernists. I think John Venari used to use that phrase as well. And a lot of it was through the role of the Novel theology. And I want to read this quote. I'm glad you included this. So it was, I think, in the summer of 2020 that Archbishop Vigano really started diving deep into the council and issuing his long interventions on the council and what he had, the conclusions that he was reaching. And that started making Bishop Barron very nervous. And he actually released, I think, a couple years ago, this full volume of the Vatican II documents. I mean, he didn't name Vigano, but it was obvious that he was responding to Vigano. That was the summer of the huge Vatican II debate. And so at the beginning of chapter 15, yes, which is the new theology behind the new springtime, you mentioned Bishop Robert Barron stated in a podcast that the quote great texts of Vatican II, like the four constitutions, I think is what he's talking about. What would be Lumen Gentium on the Church, Dei Verbum on divine revelation, Gaudium et Spes, the Church in the modern world, and what's the fourth one? I can't remember the fourth. But anyway, he says the great texts of Vatican II represent the victory of the Novel theology, which is something that Pius X mentioned actually in Pascendi. He talked about they're trying to impose a new theology. And so that's something that Pius XII reiterated.
He uses that term exactly.
Yes, exactly. And so does Pius XII in Humani Generis. So these documents represent the victory of the new theology stream over the more conservative stream. And by conservative, as you mentioned, is just the perennial Catholic theology of the Church.
Yep.
And if you say, if true, then we cannot but view this as a sort of revolution or radical change in direction that took place at Vatican II. And since the crisis in the Church has only intensified since then, we must take an honest look at the roots of the new theology to evaluate its effects properly. I know we're running short on time. We don't have
keep going,
too long to go into that too much, but I do think it's a very important subject because one of the books that you mentioned that you recommend in your book is this one by Roberto de Mattei, The Second Vatican Council, An Unwritten Story. And I'll just read one quote from here that I've mentioned in articles in the past. So he's talking about the preparations for Vatican II in the early in 1960, 61, and then 62. So he explains the council fathers were accompanied by experts, or periti in Latin. The official ones, or periti, who attended the general congregations or meeting of bishops without a right to vote, and the private ones who were invited by some bishops as advisors. On the eve of the opening of the council, John the 23rd had appointed 201 periti, or experts. At the end of the council, counting also the private experts, their number exceeded 500. Many of these theologians had been suspected of heterodoxy, which is kind of a nice way of saying heresy, during the pontificate of Pius XII, such as Fathers Congar, Denlieu, de Lubac, Haring, Kung, Ronner, and Schilbeck.
Yeah.
Schilbeck. All would have a great influence during the years of the council and the post-conciliar period. They're the ones that you mentioned that seminarians are basically required to read these guys, and they're horrible work. And I love how the fact that where is it? Somewhere in here. I think I have it on the screen here. But De Mattei provides this quote, which I love, from here it is. From Archbishop Lefebvre. He says later on in the book, Congar and de Lubac were appointed by John the 23rd as consultors to the preparatory commission, like the big commission preparing the whole council. Their names surprised many, such as Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, who was also a member of that commission. And he wrote to Cardinal Ottaviani, quote, "The names of Fathers de Lubac and Congar are with good reason names that conjure up opposition to the Church's thinking, and in particular to Humani Generis. How can these modernist-minded theologians have been appointed? ? We wonder." So, yeah, it was all, the council really was hijacked by these experts in many ways, which Archbishop Lefebvre, I think, was on record as saying if the council would have gone according to the documents that he was involved with preparing with the General Preparatory Commission, it would have been a solid council. It would have been a good council because those the original schema were good. But on like day 2 or 3 of the council, they were all trashed. And new drafts were written by these Nouvelle Theologie experts, and that's where the problems really started there. It was summed up in the word, as our friend Taylor Marshall titled his book, infiltration, basically.
Well, the main bishop who literally took the microphone from Ottaviani. Do you know his name?
Leonhard, I think.
He was consecrated Archbishop Lefebvre.
Oh, I'd forgotten that detail. Yep.
So anyway, just like this, I don't know if the word is providence, but well, in a sense that, like, the man who literally took over the council was his spiritual son was the one who sought to vanquish his nefarious efforts. There's something very poetic about that. But the new theology, my friends, and they should read the book about it, because there's a couple things I attack in the book that are like, it can't be the subject of a podcast in the sense of, it could be if the podcast was a lecture, like, because I'd have to have presentation and notes and quotes, because if you get it wrong, you just get eaten alive. The two things I was most nervous about, to be honest, Matt: personalism. I go after personalism in the book because that's a big sacred cow for a lot of people. And new theology. Those are the two ones those are the places where I expect, like, just being honest, like the Larry Chapps of the world, if they read my book, the Word on Fire types of the world, like good men. And I'm using these as like examples of good men who are smart, like real earnest men who aren't a bunch of flaming liberals. That's where I expect to get the most heat. Because in the world of post-conciliar Catholicism, in the world of like serious academic conciliar Catholicism, the Richard Decloux types of the world and stuff, they really love themselves some new theology and some personalism.
Yes.
And I did my best.
Personalism is at the heart of theology of the body, as you mentioned in the book, which is also a very big deal to a lot of people. So.
Oh my goodness. Theology of the body, when you actually take 5 seconds to look at it in the light of Thomas Aquinas, it's laughable. Like, the thing is, there's tons in theology of the body, which is fine. Because it's like, there's tons in everything that's fine. There's tons in Marx and Karl Marx that's fine, you know, in the sense of his critiques of like the capitalists. There's many things he says about that's probably, if I'm just being a little bit tongue in cheek here, it's probably fine. There's tons in everything that's probably fine, you know. But just as an example, like, just if you compare theology of the body if you compare what John Paul II says about the Eucharist, he calls it a nuptial sacrament. This is the antithesis of St. John Chrysostom. He says that marriage is an image of the Eucharist. John Paul II is saying the Eucharist is an image of marriage. It's a distinction that makes all the difference.
Right.
John Paul II believes that male and female, he created them is what the image of God is. Meaning the image of God is found in the fact that we're male and female. This is to insert composition into the deity.
Right. As opposed to we're in the image and likeness of God based on the faculties of our soul.
Rational soul. Yeah. And St. Thomas Aquinas deals with this in the Summa. And it's like an ancient error. I think he cites Augustine about it or something like that. You know, basically there are, you know, I'm paraphrasing because Aquinas was holier than I, but he says, like, you know, there's this preposterous idiots who say that the image is found in male and female. And he's like, no, there's like, this is a misunderstanding of grammar. It's like, he makes them in image of God, image and likeness of God, period. Like, period. Done. Idea finished. Male and female, he created them.
Right.
Nothing to do with their image is not male and female. And the theology of the body is completely based off of that. That's the whole basis for the theology of the body, is that the image of God is a community of persons. It's not. God is a community of persons. The Trinity, the image of God in the person is not a community of persons. And the consequences are huge. And this is part and parcel with the new theology. They play with terms, they mix old ideas with modern ideas, and it just becomes a disaster. And I do attack that pretty hard in chapter 15.
And then towards the end of the book, I think one of the last chapters, you get into modernist worship with the liturgical revolution. And, you know, you could call it liturgical modernism, I guess. Since we're in Holy Week, one example I wanted to bring up, you know, talking about the evolution of dogma and one thing changing into another. It's a pretty hot topic right now, and Father James Maudsley gave an excellent interview recently on the Catholic Unscripted channel, and I posted a clip of that, him explaining why no Catholic should ever be, you know, because part of the Novus Ordo Good Friday liturgy is it's almost like a passion play where a few parts, like the crowd parts, are assigned to the congregation, and they're supposed to, you know, say them loudly with gusto or whatever. Take him away, crucify him. We have no king but Caesar. And Father explains very eloquently why no one should ever be doing that. No one who loves Jesus Christ can say those things, especially in the context of a solemn liturgy.
Yeah, the modernist worship. I get this 2 or 3 parts in the book. Like, I get it in the beginning kind of as a teaser, and then I flesh it out with its own chapter. If you were going to design a modernist liturgy, forget Novus Ordo for a sec. But if you were just going to design a modernist liturgy, it would change all the time. It would be based on experience. It would not be hierarchical. It would be pan-religious. You know, all these different things. And it would be tailored to the particular communities and be radically different in all of them because the divine impulse is different in all peoples.
Sounds like synodality to me.
Well, it is. Well, and I show in the book, synodality started with Paul VI.
Yep.
And John Paul II wrote a whole encyclical on it. And it sounds like Pope Francis. All these things are memory hold. And anyway, I could go on and on. But yeah, the Novus Ordo it's the liturgy of modernism.
And I just want to give one very concrete example of a change that Father Maudsley mentioned in his interview recently, and that is the Good Friday prayer for the conversion of the Jews. Because basically what we're facing nowadays, and it seems to be increasing, and that's one thing that really concerns me about the Trump administration, for all the, you know, the good things he seems to be doing. his his zealous Zionism is very concerning to me, as I'm sure
Oh
it is
yeah.
to you. And we're under a threat of facing more and more accusations of being anti-Semitic simply for being Catholic or being Christian, as if the Gospels themselves are filled with hatred, and then the church's tradition is filled with hatred of Jews and whatever. So this is what the church, for centuries, the Church of Rome's ancient prayer, every Good Friday for the conversion of the Jews. I posted this in response actually to Cardinal Dolan, who was wishing our Jewish neighbors
Passover.
a happy Passover or whatever. So, and this is the pre-55 version, so it includes the word perfidious. Let us pray also for the perfidious Jews, in Latin perfidies Judaeis, that our God and Lord would withdraw the veil from their hearts, which a direct allusion to Scripture, 2 Corinthians chapter 3, that they also may acknowledge our Lord Jesus Christ. O Almighty and eternal God, who drivest not away from thy mercy even the perfidious Jews, and in the Latin literally means Jewish perfidy, hear our prayers which we offer for the blindness of that people, that acknowledging the light of thy truth, which is Christ, they may be delivered from their darkness. None of that is motivated by hatred of them. It's animated actually by true charity, which seeks the salvation of all souls, for which our Lord died on the cross. And it's grounded in the truth of the gospel. There's nothing hateful about it at all. Now, here's what the Novus Ordo version of that prayer bears no resemblance to it whatsoever. Here's the full text. Let us pray also for the Jewish people, to whom the Lord our God spoke first, that he may grant them to advance in love of his name and in faithfulness to his covenant. Now, what does that imply to you? And to me, it implies a couple of things. First of all, that the old covenant is still valid, which it's not, and that is a rupture with tradition.
It's a heresy.
Yeah, exactly. It's a heresy. It's a dogmatic truth of the faith that the old covenant has indeed been superseded by the new. The old is null and void. There is only one way to the Father, and it's Jesus Christ our Lord. As he himself said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. And the other thing that strikes me about love of his name, well, our Lord revealed the name of God in Matthew 28 before he ascended to heaven, when he told his apostles, go and baptize in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. So to grow in the love of the name of God is to grow in love of the Trinity. Those who reject the Trinity cannot grow in love of the name of God, because his name is Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, period. So this prayer goes on to say, Almighty, ever-living God, who bestowed your promises on Abraham and his descendants, hear graciously the prayers of your church, that the people you first made your own may attain the fullness of redemption. What does that mean? It says nothing about their conversion at all.
It's like the full communion thing. It's the same as the full communion thing. It's like they need the fullness of your redemption. So they have some of it. Like they have some redemption. So I guess you can be you can be redeemed in a way.
Right.
It's like Father Hess used to say. Father Hess, shout out, best videos online. If anyone wants to know anything you probably need to know about traditional Catholicism, just go look up Father Hess on YouTube and spend the next 100 hours listening to like 50 of his talks, because they're great. But he would always joke and he would say, Vatican II always says, in a sense. It's always in the documents like, in a certain sense. And he's like, what is this sense? We don't know, but it's in a certain sense. It's like in a sense, they have redemption. What does this mean? I don't know, but they have some of it. You can get the fullness of his redemption if you become Catholic, but you get enough. You get a good amount if you remain a Jew, because you're saved-ish, And it's the same thing with communion. It's like, you get the full communion, but you get some.
Right.
Whatever. It's like I got a bit of communion, so I'm all right. I'll get most of the way to heaven. I'll be mostly there. If I die in some of the communion, it says there's no black and white. And the funny thing is too is like Archbishop Lefebvre says this, and they've uncrowned him. He talks about how liberalism always leads to tyranny. Because it does in the mind. Because there's no actual answer, but nature abhors a vacuum, as the expression goes. You know, like you actually can't have peace of soul unless you sink your teeth into something. You know, the constant state of uncertainty is depressive. It's paralyzing. You know, this is why, for example, totally unrelated, but it makes sense. Economies and nations thrive usually, no matter the policy, but based on how the policy is presented. So the economy in America thrived under Bill Clinton. Was Bill Clinton a good economist? No, but what he was clear on what he was on. He was clear on his direction, and people said, "I know what the rules are. I'll invest." The economy thrived under Donald Trump the first term. Were his policies the same as Clinton's? No. The economy did not thrive under George Bush after the recession. Why? Well, the recession had a part to do with it. But what does a recession bring? Uncertainty. When you're not certain, you don't move. You stay still. If you stay still, you don't grow. Economies don't thrive. So, in the same sense, tradition, the perennial doctrines of the church, they give us certainty. The certainty allows us gray. So if you look in the disputes of the theologians of the past, you actually find pretty significant disagreement on certain things because they agree on what is necessary for there to be that interplay at all. In the new springtime, and because of that, they have a true freedom. In the new springtime, there's no definition, which means there's no certainty, which means it's paralytic and depressive, which means ultimately you can only enforce it by force of coercion, not force of truth, which is why you can't get rid of the traditional Latin Mass with argument, because the arguments suck. So you have to get rid of it with documents that don't mean anything, that are meaningless in their composition, but have the force of law behind them with tyranny.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And that actually, I wanted to bring up one closing point, that Pope Francis, he is really the fulfillment, the epitome of the modernist crisis in many ways. As you say in your book, that's something else that people need to understand, and they will if they read your book, that these problems, a lot of people, I think a lot of Catholics who are semi-attuned to what's going on, they have this idea that the problems started in 2013 with Francis, and that is just not true at all.
Yeah.
They started decades, if not hundreds of years before him, and he is simply the logical fulfillment of this process, of this modernist crisis, this cancer that's been festering in the mystical body for many years. And Bishop Fillet in October of 2013, so pretty early on in the pontificate, actually pegged him at that early point as a genuine modernist, is what he said in a sermon, based on, he was responding to this quote from Pope Francis in a 2013 interview with Father Spadaro, the Jesuit, and Antonio Spadaro, who said something like 2 + 2 doesn't always have to equal 4. It's in theology, it can equal 5, I think is what he said, or tweeted out some nonsense. So Francis said in an interview with him, if one has the answers to all the questions, that is the proof, according to Francis, that God is not with him. It means that he is a false prophet using religion for himself. The great leaders of the people of God, like Moses, have always left room for doubt. That's Francis. So Bishop Fillet said in response to that in 2013, what gospel does he have? Which Bible does he have to say such things? It's horrible. What has this to do with the gospel, with the Catholic faith? That's pure modernism, my dear brethren. I can see him in my mind saying this with great gusto and getting all
Probably
animated.
a smile.
Yes. We have in front of us, he said, a genuine modernist. How much time will be needed for people with authority in the church, namely cardinals and bishops, to stand up and to say, by no means will we accept this new teaching? I really hope and pray this will happen, but that means an enormous division in the church. And that's exactly what we're seeing today. So if you want to find out the way out of modernism, Kennedy goes into that in the final chapter of his book, but I won't go into that. I want you to buy a copy and read it for yourselves. But as I sum up in my foreword, it really can be summarized in three simple words: return to tradition. That is the answer right there.
That's what Pius X said. And he said, go back to scholasticism, go to Thomas.
Yep.
And people get annoyed by that. And it's like, I don't know what to tell you. It just works. And doesn't mean you all have to be Thomists in like the sense of, it's your vocation in life. But you have to just understand what the terms mean, and you can't just mess around with having the proper tools, which is what's happening now, and it's a disaster.
Oh, and the other thing I wanted to read, you have a great quote from Father Chad Ripperger, who's a good friend of mine. And this is at the beginning of chapter 8, The Modernist as Believer. You say, the well-known exorcist priest, Father Chad Ripperger, said the following in a conference about modernism. And he talks about this a lot. He's very well read and he's an expert on more than just exorcism. A lot of people don't realize that. He's also an expert in the field of psychology as well. I did an interview with him about that last April. But he said, modernism, which is now the heresy in the church, is so toxic. It's so much in the air that unless you have a special grace or unless you really know your faith extraordinarily well, you are simply going to end up in error, because it's like we're swimming in it.
Yep.
It's that simple. So you have to pray to God for that. And you also have to study. And so you say, Father Ripperger is correct. And if you are like me, you cannot claim that you have received a special grace. Therefore, you must study the faith deeply, which includes studying how to avoid adopting modernism as a Catholic believer. So I'll leave it there. That's a very good reason to buy this book. I hope many of you do, and buy extra copies from Sophia Institute Press to distribute maybe at your parish or among your family members and friends. Before we sign off, I also wanted to see if I can put this on the screen, but Kennedy's going to be leading a pilgrimage to the Holy Land later this year. Here we go. Is that showing up on, can you guys see that on the screen?
I can't see it.
Okay, maybe I'll put a link in the description. Okay, it's been a while since I used StreamYard. I'm a little bit out of practice here. But there we go. There we go. There we are. Okay. So this is on Kennedy's website, and I'm going to put a link in the live chat for people to visit. So Mitt, you want to tell us a little bit about what you're going to be doing? It looks like in September.
Sure. Going to the Holy Land. It's led by Catholic Heritage Tours, same group that led our pilgrimage to Italy last year, and it was great success. And the tours through the Holy Land, obviously there's like a couple dozen places you want to see, and everything from, Cana to the Holy Sepulchre to Bethlehem, and, anywhere you can think of, the Sea of Galilee, anything you can think of in the Gospels, we're going to do our best to make sure that we get there. And, Mass every day. And there'll be a traditional Catholic priest as our chaplain and so forth. It might be more than one priest, actually. I'm working on getting some more. And it's a very active pilgrimage.
Mm-hmm.
So just so people understand, the last pilgrimage to Italy was listed, as far as travel guides are concerned, as moderate. And we did about 15 to 18,000 steps a day.
Wow.
So this one is one, like, you don't have to be like a triathlete,
mm-hmm.
but don't have like an office job where you never walk and then go do this.
Right.
Just go, like, if you're going to sign up, and I hope you do, everyone, just say, I'm going to walk for a half an hour a day kind of thing. Like, just get into it. So then when you get there, you have your nice shoes, you're good to go.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was great. We got his highlights at a glance: Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, Cana, Sea of Galilee, Bethany, Mount Carmel. That sounds like it's going to be an awesome trip.
Yeah.
And who did you say is going to be the chaplain? Do you have one secured yet?
There's a couple men. They're just being confirmed. The thing is, all my SSPX priest friends are all teachers.
Yeah.
So it's right when school starts, they have to get permission. So I'm just waiting on some confirmations, but it'll be a priest of the society. Yeah.
Very good. All right, that's awesome.
The last thing I'll say, actually, Matt, before we sign off, is people can actually buy cases of books. So if they want to buy a case of books to hand out at their parish, I'll actually share the address, and it's easy to remember. Where is it? It's hold on, I'll have it right here. Author copies at sophiainstitute.com.
Oh, nice.
So like if you buy 32 or more, which is a case, it's 50% off.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that's a big difference. So you can grab them for your bookstore as a parish. You don't have to be like an official bookstore with like a status. You can grab them for your chapel. You can grab them for your men's group. You can grab them whatever. And I think the list price is like $20 or $19. So half price is like $10 a book. So pretty affordable.
Very nice. That's not one thing I'll mention before we sign off. So my new channel is called Veritatis Vox, which is Latin for the voice of truth. And it's based on our Lord's words to Pontius Pilate in John chapter 18, verse 37, which I'll let me pull that up real quick and I'll just read it for people. So here we go here. And this is very relevant considering we're in Holy Week, and we're going to be hearing these words on Good Friday, because the gospel is always the account of St. John on Good Friday. So Pilate's asking him, "Art thou a king then?" And Jesus answered, said, "Thou sayest that I am a king." And that was his public proclamation of his kingship. "For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, that I should give testimony to the truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice." So may our prayer this Holy Week be that we are indeed of the truth, that we are hearing the voice of truth and being faithful to him. So thank you so much, everybody who's joined us. It looks like we have over 300 people in the live, watching us live right now. Thank you so much for joining us. Great turnout. And I'm going to hopefully be releasing videos or doing live streams on Mondays moving forward. I do have a full-time job outside the realm of journalism and media, but I work Tuesday to Saturday, and hopefully I will be able to do a live stream, once a week, once every other week, something like that. Next Monday, I'm glad to announce that I'll be joined by Father Charles Murr for a discussion for post-Easter, and he has a new book that's come out as well, a new novel, I think based on conversations he had with a close advisor, a friend of his that was a good friend of Father Malachi Martin, something like that. I think the title is and then there was darkness, something like that. I can't remember for sure, but anyway, I'll look forward to that discussion, and look forward to future discussions with you, Kennedy, on Veritatis Vox.
It's a pleasure, man. I'm glad to see you back in the saddle.
Thank you so much. Well, from Kennedy and I, we appreciate you joining us. And until next time, God bless, Godspeed, and have a wonderful, blessed Holy Week, everyone. Take care.